Coming up, it is the first day of the 2023 White House Tribal Nations Summit. We have the latest developments from Washington, D.C. Plus, Minnesota Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan is now believed to be the first Native woman to ever lead a national party organization. We tell you which one. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines on the ICT Newscast.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
The ICT Newscast is sponsored by the Indian Land Tenure Foundation, a nonprofit organization serving American Indian nations and people in the recovery and control of their rightful homelands. On the web at iltf.org.
Support for the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez comes from the Arizona PBS studios in Phoenix at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications at Arizona State University.
Amadawa Hopa. Thank you for joining us. I am Aaliyah Chavez. We start today in Denver, where lobbying work by Native leaders appears to be paying off. City officials said this week they will not reinstall a statue of Christopher Columbus that was toppled during pandemic-era protests. The statue was torn down in 2020 by protesters in the wake of George Floyd's murder in Minneapolis. City leaders were silent for years on plans for the monument. This fall, they sparked outrage, asking Native elders at a focus meeting if it were okay to put the statue back up. The Denver American Indian Commission pushed back, and on Monday, city officials wrote to say the statue would not go back up. Commission co-chair Raven Payment told ICT she has mixed emotions.
It's bittersweet. I'm happy in the end. And I hope that the city and county of Denver works to not only do right by the harm that they caused, our elders, but, also considers how they'll be doing these focus sessions with our communities going forward.
The city said that a statue of frontiersman Kit Carson, removed by the city after the Columbus Monument was toppled, will also not be going back up. In the Southeast, 3 tribes from the Florida Panhandle are seeking state recognition after State Representative Michelle Salzman filed a bill last week. The Santa Rosa Band of the Lower Muskogee, the Muskogee Nation of Florida, and the Lower Chattahoochee Band of Yuchi Indians are located in Salzman's district. The Seminole and Miccosukee are the state's 2 federally recognized tribes. They are both located in the southern part of the state and known for their role in preserving the Everglades. Becoming state recognized is important because it could make it easier for the tribes to someday be federally recognized. We move now to politics, where 4 Republican candidates running for U.S. president are taking the debate stage on Wednesday night. That comes just days after North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum withdrew his name from the race. GOP political strategist Mike Stopp told ICT Burgum made Native nations a big part of his campaign for governor. In that role, he increased college scholarships for Native students and codified the Indian Child Welfare Act into state law. Burgum was the only Republican candidate who really understood the role and sovereignty of tribes, according to Stopp. He added that the remaining Republican candidates wouldn't have the same background as Burgum when working with tribal nations. Heading to Australia, a new study shows alarming statistics for Indigenous children. The country's government is out with its annual Family Matters report. It showed that more than 22,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children were in out-of-home care. That is roughly the same as foster care for those in the U.S. Other data indicates Indigenous children were 10.5 times more likely to be removed from their families. Experts say the Australian government is currently not on course to reach its goal of reducing the number of Aboriginal children in care by 45% by the year 2031. And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. Minnesota Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan was elected as the chair of the Democratic Lieutenant Governors Association, also known as the DLGA, on Tuesday. She was already the highest-ranking elected Native woman in the country and is now believed to be the first Native woman to lead a national party committee. We're joined now virtually with Lieutenant Governor Flanagan with more on what this means ahead of a presidential election year. Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, hello to you.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
The purpose of the DLGA is to elect Democrats to office, and it's interesting timing to be elected to this role ahead of a presidential election year.
It is interesting timing, but I think it's right on time. As we're looking towards 2024, we know that Indian country will help to deliver votes, I think, all across the nation. And my hope is that we'll be able to highlight the role that lieutenant governors can play in building tribal state relations, as well as getting folks out there to vote. We're an important constituency that cannot be overlooked.
There are 11 elections for lieutenant governors occurring in 2024. Tell us which states those are.
So we are currently focused for 2024 on the state of North Carolina, Washington, Oregon. We'll be focused on some elections in Delaware, but also knowing that lieutenant governors are incredibly important surrogates, I think, as we're looking towards this national election. So in our swing states, we have strong leadership in Michigan, Wisconsin, as well as Arizona. So these are all places, and Minnesota. These are all places where we need to ensure that people are turning out to vote. And the beautiful thing about Democratic lieutenant governors is that we're on the front lines of our communities on so many issues that folks care about, and I think can be credible messengers to reach the constituencies that are needed to turn out in 2024.
In those states that you just mentioned, tell us how you're planning on reaching Native American voters in those states.
So for the Democratic Lieutenant Governors Association, my job is to make sure that we are fundraising so that we can work on the campaigns that we're highlighting. Also doing a lot of travel, a lot of conversations with folks. And my hope is to also be able to highlight the work that we've been able to do in the state of Minnesota. Just this past week, the governor and I became the first administration in the history of the state of Minnesota to visit all 11 Native nations during our time in office. We've created a tribal state relations office, policies in place to ensure that we're doing tribal consultation, that every commissioner, deputy commissioner, and really state government as a whole understands tribal state relations, is going through that training. And we've really focused on that partnership. And so that, I think, is one of the most powerful tools that we can lift up through this election cycle, is talking about what is possible when you elect Democrats, and when you elect Democrats who are focused on strengthening those relationships. And I'm certainly the first Native woman to lead the DLGA and to be elected to lieutenant governor, but I will not be the last, because that is the work that is before us, to ensure that people can see themselves in these roles, but also are getting engaged and involved because they see what's at stake for their own lives and the lives of their communities.
We know that the roles and responsibilities of lieutenant governors vary from state to state, but talk to us about the importance of these positions, and especially in your own experience.
So part of the most important role for the second in command is to be ready. If, God forbid anything were to happen to the governors in each of our states. In order to be ready, we have to be informed by what is happening every day, it partners with the governors in how we're governing and running the state. And really, in state to state, the statutes vary with regards to what is required of each role. But I also think that is where really the magic can happen, where we can create and define this role. I think so many of our lieutenant governors have really taken on important issues like gun violence prevention, paid family and medical leave, universal meals for kids, protecting access to abortion care. All of these pieces are things that are in the portfolios of lieutenant governors. And I think lieutenant governors are doers. Many of us came from organizing work and movement work, advocacy, and now we're at the decision-making table, and we're able to, move these agendas that we've been working on for quite some time. So I don't want people to sleep on LGs. That's my pro tip of the day, right? We are this place where, for Democratic lieutenant governors, we're the most diverse body of statewide elected officials in the country. 75% of us are either women or people of color or indigenous. This is the future of the party. And if we're going to have a strong democracy, it has to accurately reflect the people it seeks to represent. The Democratic Lieutenant Governors Association is where that work is happening. And we are future governors, senators, congresspeople, and we are leading in our own right in this moment as well.
As I said before, you are now believed to be the first Native woman to lead a national party committee. Take us through what ran through your head as you learned the election results for yourself.
More than anything, I felt a lot of gratitude. And if I'm being very candid, I also felt a lot of pressure. Many of us know, I think about, Secretary Holland or Congresswoman Davids, what it means to be the first. It means you need to, make sure that you are doing things in a good way and setting a good example, but also creating conditions so that people say, I want to do that. I can do that. So I'm honored and humbled to be in this role. I am grateful for the confidence that my colleagues have instilled in me, and I'm going to make sure that the visibility of the issues in Indian country and the fact that we are contemporary people who are leading in every sector is highlighted throughout my tenure as chair of the DLGA.
Lieutenant Governor, while we have you here, today is the first day of the 2023 White House Tribal Nations Summit. Have you spoken to anyone in the Biden White House, and is there anything in particular that you're going to be watching from that major event?
So I'll be honest, I have a little FOMO because I am not in Washington, D.C. Right now, but I know that there are so many folks who are gathered together who are doing good work. I am excited to hear about the changes and the updates with the Department of Interior with regards to land into trust, and look forward to learning more about that. I know that my chairman, Chairman Fairbanks, is there representing the good people of the White Earth Nation, and so look forward. We'll be talking later this afternoon. We'll get an update, but I think this is a new day for our people. The Biden-Harris administration, I think, but in particular, Secretary Deb Holland, we've never been in partnership like this before. And so my hope is that this becomes a model for how we do this work. And I am just excited about the results to come out of this time. But we're making history every day. And I think this summit will be the same thing.
Well, Minnesota Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Wednesday is the start of the 2023 White House Tribal Nations Summit. The two-day in-person event is a chance for leaders from more than 500 tribal nations to speak directly with high-level federal officials. ICT regular contributor Holly Cook Mararo is in Washington, D.C. right now. She is the founding principal and president of The Angle, and she is also a board member of Indig Public Media, the parent company that owns ICT and the ICT Newscast. Hi, Holly.
Hi, Leah. It's good to see you.
Walking around our nation's capital, tell us what the atmosphere is like today with so many tribal leaders in town.
Well, it's been a busy couple of days already. Tribal leaders began arriving on Monday into Washington, D.C. The registration started yesterday for the Tribal Nations Summit, and Secretary Holland hosted, kind of virtually hosted a reception in the Secretary's suite, which was really quite beautiful last night. There was indigenous chefs that provided the food, and as they are today at the summit, which I think is really a great point for the Department of Agriculture and Secretary Vilsack, along with his staff, Heather Don Thompson, who I know had a key hand in putting that together. Featuring those indigenous chefs. So there was a tribal leader prep session hosted by a number of the national organizations, the National Congress of American Indians, the National Indian Health Board, and others, which really was an opportunity for tribal leaders to prepare their remarks. They had some engagement and pre-planning with some of the White House staff about how things would go today. And last night at the reception, I think many of you know that, or at least it was announced that Secretary Holland has COVID. So she was unable to attend her reception last evening, and she is attending and moderating virtually today. So the town is very busy with everyone. I know a number of tribes are also doing Hill visits. Congress is in session this week. We're at the end of the session. We've got a pending CR coming in January. We have so we've got appropriations bills, a number of really hot button gaming issues, and other things going on. So just there's a lot of tribal work going on this weekend in Washington, D.C. This week, not weekend.
You mentioned Secretary Holland testing positive for COVID. In your conversations with tribal leaders and people who traveled all the way to Washington, D.C., what are their reactions? I could imagine that some feel a little bit sad because she's very, very popular in Indian country.
Absolutely. I think there's some disappointment in folks who aren't able to see and visit with the Secretary this year. She is very popular, as you know, and I know I had a chance to chat with her, and I know she feels really badly as well that she's not able to be there. There's, I think, nearly 400 tribal leaders in town, or 400 tribes that are represented. When I checked last, that was the RSVP number that had RSVP'd, and then a number of observers and orgs. So I think on both sides, everybody is missing her presence at the summit.
With day one of the summit, Holly, tell us what topics and events you're going to be watching closely.
Well, I was really watching to see whether they would announce the new fee to trust regs, and those were announced this morning. They've been somewhat long awaited, and there was some question about whether the administration would move forward with them today. Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs Brian Newland announced them on the panel this morning, and that the final rule, the final reg, is done, and so it is intended, in line with the Biden administration's priorities and commitments to Indian country, that the process of placing land in a trust for the benefit of a tribe or individual Indians would be easier, would become more streamlined. And so those are done on the books. We also expect a couple of other big announcements over the next 24 hours as well. Today is kind of the main summit day where the president will speak, the vice president will speak, and then tomorrow is a full day of panels. And all of those have very high-level cabinet officials, from the Attorney General to Secretary Becerra and others, that lead these panels and really provide an opportunity for interaction and questions and engagement, direct engagement with tribal leaders. So it's really turned into more of a two-day conference.
You mentioned that President Joe Biden is expected to speak with tribal leaders directly. Tell us the significance of a speech like that.
You know, I say this a lot, that to the naked eye, it might seem as if this one day summit where the president comes and we have the day tomorrow with the panels is really, you know, what does that do? Is there a lot of meaning to this? But there really is. The preparation that goes in and the engagement that it requires from every agency and department across the administration is the real value here. every agency, every department has to show up and talk about whether they're meeting the requirements for consultations with tribes, whether they're meeting the requirements and commitments of supporting tribal sovereignty, tribal programs, engagement with tribal leaders in their departments, and how they're doing that, whether they're meeting, the Justice 40 goals at Energy, whether they're meeting the commitments to take land into trust at Interior, whether our commitments to support Indian health programs and funding at the Department of Health and Human Services. So while it may seem as if this is a one-day conference and with supporting side panels, and that the president is just going to give a speech, but the meaning behind this is much bigger than that. This is an administration-wide effort and commitment that drives action that is good for Indian country.
We, of course, can let our viewers know that they can follow us on our coverage on ictnews.org for all of the latest having to do with the 2023 White House Tribal Nation Summit. ICT regular contributor Holly Cook-Mararo, thank you so much, as always.
Thank you, Aaliyah.
As we just heard, the White House Tribal Nation Summit is a direct dialogue between elected tribal leaders and members of the president's cabinet, as well as other government agencies. Often missing from the story is both the history and context. ICT's Mark Trahant takes us on a journey.
In the White House Library, there's a portrait of a Pawnee leader, Chief Sharo, from his visit to the White House with President John Monroe in 1821. He told the president in a speech at the entrance hall, "I will not tell a lie. I'm going to tell the truth. You love your country, you love your people, you love the manner in which they live, and you think your people are brave. I am like you, my great father. I love my country. I love my people. I love the manner in which we live, and think myself and the warriors brave." The artist Samuel F.B. Morris's painting, The House of Representatives, is a retelling of the chief and his delegation's visit to Congress in 1821 during a debate on U.S. Indian policy. Chief Patel Sharo's painting is an important bit of context before this White House summit. The relationship between tribal leaders and presidents was once a regular, common occurrence. In December 1923, President Calvin Coolidge met with the Committee of 100, a group of American Indian leaders. Cherokee educator Ruth Muskrat Bronson gave a speech at the event, Indian Leadership, Past and Present. Franklin D. Roosevelt, Harry Truman, and John F. Kennedy all met with tribes. John F. Kennedy spoke to the National Congress of American Indians from the Rose Garden.
I want to express our thanks to Walter Wetzel and to the National Conference of American Indians. Receiving you as representative of the Indian tribes, I'm carrying on a tradition begun by George Washington and really, in a sense, continued by every president of the United States.
When President Richard Nixon met with leaders of the Taos Pueblo on July 8, 1970, the White House picked the Cabinet Room as the venue. What better way to demonstrate the government-to-government relationship? After the ceremony signing the return of Blue Lake to the Taos Pueblo, Nixon told a colleague that this was one of the best moments of his presidency.
That it needs to feel more special. Throwing us all together in some big, hall at Interior or at EPA or whatnot just doesn't feel very special, right? That you're really honoring that government-to-government relationship. And you're right. And honestly, I think it was a lot of older tribal leaders who remembered some of them all the way back to Nixon, right? And they felt like, man, that was really powerful.
It doesn't feel as if the White House is as open as it used to be to invitations. When was the last time, a tribal leader was invited to even a state dinner, let alone a private dinner with the president because of a president's personal interest?
President Bill Clinton had one of those meetings on April 29, 1994 at the White House. I asked Holly about another White House event.
I think a lot of folks forget that the precursor for this Tribal Nation Summit. Do you remember when Mark Van Norman was in OTJ? Well, he was the director of Office of Tribal Justice, and we called it an Economic Development Summit. Basically this, it was like every tribal leader, we had every cabinet secretary show up,
It was the craziest thing.
And that led to President Barack Obama's 2009 White House Tribal Nations Summit.
I am honored to be with you today at this unique and historic event, the largest and most widely attended gathering of tribal leaders in our history.
And that brings us to the value.
Every single agency and department has to come up with a list of actions they've taken, of decisions they've made, and what the priorities are for those departments. And they have to deliver on those when they show up at the Tribal Nations Conference. So what happens is it spurs action all through the year, and it also spurs action afterwards.
In Phoenix, Mark Trahant, ICT News.
Well, ICT invites you to be part of something special. Each week, we're taking on a different topic important to Indigenous people and to you, our viewers and readers. Find the link at ictnews.org to sign up for our e-weekly newsletter, which is emailed on Thursdays. We are covering food, business, economic development, arts, and culture. And for December, we're working on a very special holiday edition. And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest, visit ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.